We're now going to answer the age-old question about Lewis Hamilton. Every single weekend, everybody asks, how good was Lewis Hamilton? How good is Lewis Hamilton now, and why has he declined? So in today's video, we're going to answer that question. So what has happened to Lewis Hamilton? I've said many times before, his downfall sort of started beginning at the Brazilian Grand Prix in 2023. Lewis Hamilton qualified 5th and got up to 3rd at the opening lap, but he fell to 4th after the red flag restart, and then ultimately finished 8th place whilst his teammate DNF'd. That seemed to begin a series of qualifying errors that would begin at the second half of 2023. Ever since the summer break in 2023, Lewis Hamilton struggled in qualifying. At the Dutch Grand Prix, he was out in Q2. In Italy, he ended up 8th on the grid whilst his teammate was 4th. In Singapore, Russell was on the front row whilst Hamilton was only 5th. And there was just many weekends where Lewis Hamilton wasn't as good. That all kicked off in Las Vegas then, where Lewis Hamilton qualified 11th, finished 7th. Abu Dhabi, Lewis Hamilton qualified 11th, finished 9th. And then we headed into 2024, the season where Lewis Hamilton's downfall truly began. In Bahrain, he had an awful qualifying lap, qualifying 9th whilst his teammate was 3rd. Lewis Hamilton was going to finish 7th, and the occurrence last year is that Lewis Hamilton was by far superior in race pace over his teammate George Russell. The problem is that he would start so far behind, he wouldn't be able to attack his teammate. There were exceptions. During the penultimate round of 2024, Lewis Hamilton was driving a second off George Russell's pace and would end up with 2 penalties and a puncture to end up out the points, whilst Russell was 4th. Hamilton finished 10th in Brazil, again well slower than Russell, but most in pretty much every single dry race, Lewis Hamilton was the superior Mercedes. Just to Italy, for example, Russell qualified 3rd, would end up 7th. Hamilton would go from 7th all the way up to 5th position, beating people like Verstappen and Perez on his way to that position. I think Lewis Hamilton this year, though, is on a new era, struggling. Against Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton's probably had an average better results than he did in 2024. When you think of Lewis Hamilton's Ferrari season so far, everyone's going to start talking about China, where Lewis Hamilton took pole and pretty much dominated the race, 2020-esque. However, Lewis Hamilton has struggled. Lewis Hamilton spun in Australia qualifying, only finishing 10th in the race, and Bahrain and Saudi Arabia didn't help much either, along with Japan. The only other good race Lewis Hamilton has had is the Bahrain Grand Prix, where Hamilton finished 5th. He was pretty quick in the race, but still not on his teammate Charles Leclerc's level. And that's going to become a theme that even Lewis Hamilton admitted is going to last for the rest of the season. But how many more times can he keep saying this? In 2024 and 2023 as well, Lewis Hamilton, in fact, no, and 2022 as well, Lewis Hamilton said that the next season was what he was waiting for. If he said that in 2022, 2023, and 2024, and he's going to say it again at the end of this year, is there ever going to be a time Lewis Hamilton gets back? Because next year Lewis Hamilton will be 41. And yes, there'll be new regulations, but can Lewis Hamilton even challenge for the championship even when the car's competitive? We know Lewis Hamilton occasionally has off weekends, but those off weekends are becoming the norm. And now good weekends are becoming more of a surprise. Each season since 2021, Lewis Hamilton has gradually took less podiums, less poles, and less wins, to the point now where Lewis Hamilton sits 7th in the World Championship, and it's very unlikely he's going to finish any higher. Take this to 2024, Hamilton finished 7th, his worst ever championship position, but at least he was fighting for 6th and George Russell. Can you ever see Lewis Hamilton actually fighting Charles Leclerc in the championship this year? It's probably not going to happen. And Hamilton's struggles generally come down to the fact that he can't master these ground effect cars. Now when he's driving around, the ground effect cars just don't match his driving style. And unlike Carlos Sainz in 2022, Lewis Hamilton hasn't learned to adapt to these new regulations, and it means every time he's driving, especially in qualifying, he's overdriving the car and braking too late. You can look at Silverstone 2024, if you look at an in-depth lap between him and George Russell, Hamilton and Russell are separated by a 10th heading into Maggotts and Beckett's, but Hamilton overdrived, tried to brake even later, and then ended up 2/10 behind George Russell. And that just shows up every single qualifying in 2024 and every qualifying in 2025. The only track Lewis Hamilton's had qualified Charles Leclerc on was China. The only weekend this season Lewis Hamilton was stronger than Charles Leclerc. So if it can happen in one weekend, then why is it happening to the rest? That is a mystery the rest of 2025 will reveal for sure. Hamilton at tracks like Silverstone, Spain, Hungary and Spa, all tracks Lewis Hamilton will perform at. But then I might want to add that Japan's always been a circuit Lewis Hamilton had qualified his teammates at. Even in 2024, Hamilton was quite quicker than George Russell. However, Lewis Hamilton was well behind Charles Leclerc this weekend, so if that's one of Hamilton's best circuits, then what happens when you go into one of his worst circuits, like Qatar later on this year? Will Hamilton be knocked out in Q2? So far, he hasn't, which is an improvement over last year. But is this really the fall of Lewis Hamilton?